Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Talking Success. Now, I think anyone tuning into the podcast over, I don't know, maybe the last couple of years, I think, has probably heard me harp on about stablecoins and the world of crypto and remittance and the use of stablecoins for cross-border payments. So I'm delighted to be joined by someone who's a true expert in this area. Me, I just talk about it. I've never built a blockchain. I've never even seen a blockchain. But I've got Jonathan Katende on the line, all the way over from New York. That's not where he originates from. He'll give us a bit of story, a bit of background in a minute. But Jonathan's is the CEO of Lipa World, and they do some really interesting things around stablecoin, around using that as a payment method for cross-border, for remittance, for actually spending. And I think that's been one of the kind of big hurdles about adoption of any type of stable coin or crypto is actually what we call the off ramping. So being able to utilize those funds when you have them, in your wallet. So I'm really delighted, Jonathan. Thanks so much for joining. I'm looking forward to this episode. I'm a big fan of this part of the ecosystem. So I've got loads of questions for you, but if we can start with an intro, how you ended up in New York, because I know it's not a New Yorker accent you got there. So, yeah, give us a bit of background, and we can dive straight in.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much for having me, Darren, and good day to your viewers. So the long story short is that, my background is an immigrant journey, right? So taking you back to, my early move to South Africa, it was from the DRC. So I grew up there, grew up in South Africa, got there when I was 10, went all the way to tertiary. Long story short, did a few years in tech. So I was a tech operator and I worked across various startups. So one of the things that sort of stood out was one, my immigration journey, but also number two, my startup journey. Sort of a few years later, I moved with my small family to the US for a job opportunity that my wife had, and I couldn't let that bug go. So, as you would imagine, immigrant times two, there was an opportunity for us to really build something substantial off my previous work experience. So, we essentially built Lipa World, which was a stablecoin powered wallet that enables immigrant freelancers and businesses to earn, spend, and send. And how we do that is by offering on-chain banking through a virtual account anywhere in the world without requiring an SSN. We have also enabled a stablecoin wallet to enable you to move funds cross-border instantly without any delays. And then more importantly, which is really touching the financial inclusion piece of, where we began, is really this marketplace. So this marketplace allowing you to send essential goods and services through a various list of merchants that we put up on the marketplace, where you can send gift cards, vouchers back home for its intended purposes. So I'm sure you know quite well the informal sector in South Africa and how prominent vouchers are.
Absolutely.
And essentially, that was our take on providing a more direct and impactful way to remit back home.
Wonderful. So if I can understand this correctly, please correct me if I get this wrong. But if you're in the diaspora, you're in the US, for example, and you've got family in pick a country, Kenya, right? And you want to actually let's use South Africa. You want to remit funds back to that individual rather than sending them USDC, USDT, so a stable coin. You send them a voucher that you is for Shoprite or for any of the merchants that you've got on board. Is that correct?
The one component, absolutely. So
Okay.
you can do that too. And again, that it was always intended for, those who prefer greater control how their remittance is used. But today you can also use your stable coins to move funds home and have it, settled in local fiat into your bank account.
Yeah. Okay. And I imagine, obviously, being quite involved in sort of the regulatory landscape, there's probably some regulators that are sitting there quaking at their boots, and probably sending shivers down their spine in terms of certainly in South Africa when you've got exchange controls. How do you navigate that?
Mm.
Because obviously the flow of funds in and out of somewhere like South Africa is very tightly governed. So how do you work that model?
Yeah, so I think we're very blessed in South Africa to have a very forward-looking, Reserve Bank, administration that have actually done a lot of great work from a caps licensing perspective. And to be quite honest, many other African countries are trying to follow up.
Yeah.
Kenya's trying to launch their own one. Nigeria has a form of crypto licensing via the SEC. And I think South Africa should be quite proud because, it's only countries like the US now that are trying to put laws in place for stable coins and crypto.
Mm.
That said, I think there's a strong argument that comes in for the usage of stable coins because one, they are pegged one to the dollar and they are regulated depending, of course, on which stable coin you're using. In our particular instance, we exclusively use USDC
Okay.
as a so-called alliance
Yeah.
partner. That's number one. And number two, when dealing with stable coins, I think from a reserve bank perspective and central banks all across the continent, they actually can benefit from stable coins coming into the shores as opposed to having to use cash dollar reserves, which sometimes can be, very limited.
Mm.
And we know these stories of countries like Zimbabwe, Algeria, where people can't export dollars out of the economy because there's a dollar reserve problem. So stablecoins allow you to alleviate that somewhat. So I think it's very good for the industry, and I think it's just a matter of time before we get sort of mass adoption at scale.
And on that point regarding sort of the dollar, the US dollar, that there is a lot of talk, and there has been for many years, about de-dollarization across the continent,
Mm.
especially when you've got BRICS and we've got the PAP scheme that was recently launched. Where do you see that going? Do you think that's going? Do you think there'll be a Pan African stablecoin at some point? Do you think that will be overtaken by CBDCs in certain countries? Do you still see the dollar being, the primary trading currency? What's your views around that?
Yeah, so without going into the academia
Politics.
of it too
Yeah,
much,
yeah,
when we initially started, we were so, theoretically focused in the space. So we did so much research in terms of the Singapore Money Authority's Orchid project, and that's actually how we started. We looked at the detail and we saw, oh, great, you could do this with CBDCs and you could do this with crypto and also vouchers and what Grab had done in Southeast Asia.
sure.
And, what we realized is that in trying to approach a CBDC approach, you have to deal with a lot of political will and coordination for it to actually work. Today, there's only one market that has officially said they're going into it, which is Rwanda now, I believe. Um, for it to actually pan out, I think is also a very difficult affair, and it will take some time. To be very clear, from a US perspective, they've decided not to do CBDCs,
Yeah,
as an example, right? And if you know anything about global politics, if the US sneezes, kind of everyone feels it. So, they kind of help us also guide where policy is going. So to answer your question, I think CBDCs will be relevant, but I'm not sold as to whether they'll drive regional adoption because I think fundamentally, we've seen with many initiatives, they're good in theory, but I think having them executed, I think we're still waiting for many of these things to pan out.
yeah, absolutely. You obviously mentioned the US, so we can't talk about sort of stablecoins without talking about the US. And again, not getting into politics here whatsoever, but there's a lot of noise, positive, I think, generally around stablecoins. Certainly over the last 6 months, right? It seems to have just gone crazy. Everyone's talking stablecoins, or perhaps just that's what sort of the news feeds feed me because of my interest. But there has been so much traction around stablecoins. We've seen, the likes of Ripple, of RLUSD. We've seen obviously what's happening, or kind of Tether's um, mark on the market. We've seen obviously Circle. There's other stablecoin operators. There's the Ripple's buying now. I just saw just now they've just bought sort of some rails as well, $200 million. So all of this infrastructure and all of these big players are coming into the market. From your perspective, because I know you run on Circle, what's the differentiator between one stable coin to another?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I think, for those who are not, crypto natives, I think it's important to mention, the regulatory aspect of those stable coins. So if I took you back to a couple of years ago when, I believe it was USDC that almost defaulted, right? Because there wasn't any regulation in place for the amount of dollar reserves they had for each stable coin, right? And that was due to the run on the bank, in the US. I forget now the name of the bank that had an issue.
S-
That
uh,
said,
SBF, wasn't it?
that's right. That's right. So that created a huge cascading issue where, people were wondering, like, is there actually money behind the stablecoin, right? Fast forward, a few years and where we are now, there is actual regulation. There are financial audits that are required for those stable coins to show that, there actually are reserves for all those stable coins that are being issued. Now, why that's important is because not all stablecoin issuers do that.
Mm.
Okay, they don't make it available to have audited financials that says X amount of stable coins that we are issuing, we actually have that money in the bank in the form of cash or bonds or whatever it is. So I think fundamentally that's what consumers should be aware of. And I think it's also our job to make sure that we communicate that quite transparently. So I think that's the one key part that you can look at, right? And number two, I think, not all stable coins are accepted across all countries, right? There are some that have been banned, right? So when you want to look at a stable coin that you're using, you want to make sure that it can travel around the world and it has met all the regulatory, loopholes that make it essentially borderless money.
Jonathan, let's just talk about that for a minute, if I can just press you on this.
Mm,
Actually, for an explanation. So you mentioned that some countries don't accept certain stable coins. Okay, I get that. But if I've isn't that the point of decentralization? So if I have a wallet, and the wallet accepts any form of crypto, whatever it may be, does that not circumnavigate then sort of this ruling that a certain stablecoin can't be accepted in a country? Or are you talking about the kind of the then conversion and the off ramping? What area is that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's more exactly what you did, the on-ramping actually and the off-ramping part. So I think in most cases, stable coins are not going to replace the banking system today. I think that everyone understands that. But it still requires some elements of the banking sector to be involved.
Yeah,
So, for example, in the US, when we offer our on-chain banking, product to our customers, it still goes through a banking account number and a routing number. So those touch points are still there, right? So the banks have obviously got regulatory requirements to make sure that you're dealing with the right issuer, and it's not connected to any person dealing with sanctions, who your sanctions listed, or it adheres to ML policy and so on.
absolutely.
So it's really around how it plays into the mainstream economy. And again, your point is well made. It can still happen in sort of the dark world and the dark web, but what we're talking about is really an integration of the two worlds and making sure that it moves seamlessly.
Let's bring it to Africa.
Mm,
I think there's a lot of acceptance that a stable coin can lower the can reduce time by
yeah,
by 200-300%, whatever that number is, right? And can reduce cost, and that's on the
right.
remittance side. What are the other
Mm.
user cases around stablecoin, specifically with an African focus?
Yeah, so on the cost bit, I still think we have a bit of work to do, particularly on the off-ramping side. If you're talking merely peer-to-peer, 100%,
Yeah,
that's you can't beat that, right? But then on the continent, I think one huge opportunity that we're seeing is cross-border trade. So, suppliers, in one African country doing business with another person in another country and moving funds instantly,
yeah.
with the balance only needed to be settled, I think is a great unlock for regional integration.
Mm.
So for us, when we look at the $1 trillion cross-border opportunity, there lies a very quick opportunity for us to, make payments and make sort of business flow much easier. So I think we're in a very interesting time where we're almost leapfrogging the old financial rails that we had, and I think it's very exciting for many people.
You know what? It reminds me. I'm showing my age here a little bit, Jonathan, right? But sort of 20 years ago, and we were talking about 4G or 3G, what it was back then in Europe in developed markets, and they're going, yeah, but we've got this infrastructure and we've got this legacy and the mobile adoption. And then you looked at it from an African lens, and it was like, listen, we have a clean slate. Like we don't have fixed line telcos. Everything is mobile, so adoption and rollout was so much quicker and less convoluted than what it has in other markets. And I just feel we're kind of on that cusp now of that there can be some mass adoption. I do feel there's a trust element that needs to be built. I think with the younger
Mm,
generation who are mobile first and consume all of social media, but probably are more aware and more understanding of stablecoin. But I know if I was to sit with my mother or my grandmother and start talking to them about a stablecoin, I'd lose them. Because I don't explain
yeah.
things very well. But do you feel that's I wouldn't say a barrier. Do you think that's a challenge that needs to be overcome by industry itself with the
Mm.
support of the banks? Or do you think this is very much a fintech crypto kind of ecosystem and we need to go out and win the customer and the banks are really just the pipes in some markets that are necessary?
Yeah, so I think all sort of elements that you've just mentioned are will still need each other's support and collaboration. We've seen, major banks in the US, for example, doing a complete 180. If you had asked them last year or maybe a few years ago, would you ever accept stable coins? They would say no. And
Begins
today
with a
it's
J.
like, yeah, let's
Begins
do
with
it.
a J, doesn't it? Yeah,
I plead the fifth. But it's super, super exciting because I think now, even locally, we're seeing a lot of interest. So I'm I'm having discussions with major banks across Africa, South Africa for one, and they already are super, super interested in the space. And I think for them now is just to get the regulatory, clarity. And I think once that comes, fintechs like us and banks can sort of, collaborate in that fashion because, these are ways in which they can also optimize their own business, right?
absolutely.
But from a financial education piece, I think the onus also rests on the ecosystem and businesses like us to make sure that stablecoin journey is as seamless as possible. So when you look at what we're doing at Lipa World, when you open our app, it's as if like you're opening a regular banking app. You're not seeing your wallet address. You're not having to worry about gas fees. Those are all the things we're trying to put in the back end, but making sure that your customer experience is seamless. And I think over time we will see users, getting a bit more clued up and actually getting part of it. And you touched on the younger generations and how they've taken up stable coins. That was out of necessity, right? We know many markets like Venezuela and Argentina that is just booming in the space because people needed to get paid, and we've seen the same thing in Nigeria. And I think it's just a matter of time before someone actually asks you, what is your wallet address? So I don't think we're too far away from that, but I think it's very exciting because the utility is just so seamless.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking, if I asked my mother or my grandmother, what happens when you tap your watch or your phone? How does that payment work?
Mhm.
No one's going to have a clue, right? And why would
Yeah.
they? They just know that I tap something and I pay for something and I get the goods or the service or whatever it may be. And I think the kind of utopia is to get to that point where it's completely seen. It makes no difference to the consumer, the remitter, the receiver, whoever it may be. That the pipes are stable coins rather than a traditional rail or going via a bank or corresponding bank and what have you. So I think that's kind of where we need to get to as an industry is again
Mm.
not to deceive people and say it's not a stable coin and it's this. But I genuinely think we need to get to a point where people don't care because it just works, right? something works, you don't really
Yeah.
worry about it. And I think that's kind of the ultimate. Let's talk about the goals, though, of Lipa World. Where are you guys at in terms of your journey? What's on the horizon? What have you learned along the way? And yeah, what can you tell us?
Yeah, so if you had asked me this questions just under 3 years ago, I was going to tell you it's going to be a breeze, and I have really found a lot of respect for all my former bosses who were also founders,
Right.
and understood that what goes to plan never really materializes. That said, I think in the persistence to continue building, we've realized that we are driving a lot of value and opportunity in unlocking additional volumes for businesses locally who are trying to receive remittance dollars.
Mm,
And I think that's been really a joy for me to see the impact not only that we're doing to families but also businesses that can now have access to international buyers by integrating with us. So that's number one. Today we are live across 4 markets, so South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, and Zimbabwe. And again, in some instances, it's more marketplace as opposed to the wallet and the virtual bank account opening. And there's various reasons for that. We're still dealing with archaic, sanction screening, and for certain countries, so certain people can't open bank accounts. But I think when we overcome some of those things, it might be interesting to see how stablecoins can power really the day-to-day lives of many people. And for us, we're really building a financial ecosystem that allows anyone to really move their money their way. So, those dollars can essentially allow you to, prevent currency volatility by not having have to settle and withdraw into local fiat. But it also gives you greater flexibility because you would imagine, if you're traveling abroad and you don't want those no-name bank push notifications showing you the FX that you've just incurred.
yeah.
It's quite nice to tap with a dollarized bank account and then card. So we're seeing a lot of opportunities to just make money more seamless and borderless. And that's been our goal, essentially.
At the beginning, you were talking about being an immigrant, sort of second time round. Let's talk about migrant workers, specifically in
Mm.
Africa. And I know it's a big challenge when you come to a new country. Doesn't matter where you're from. Setting up banking, and if you don't have an address and you haven't got KYC and you don't have all of the documents that typically you need and an ID number and what have you to go and set up a bank account. I know how difficult it was when I first came to South Africa to set up a bank account. Didn't have those documents that were required, so I didn't have an ID number. Do solutions like Lipa World and Stablecoin offer that access, right? Because you can do your KYC based on your passport, I would imagine, and some other sort of documents. Does that mean that you're able to, as a migrant worker, move kind of cross border without having the complexities of setting up bank accounts in each country? Again, I don't know from a regulatory side, but in theory, is that how it works?
Yeah, in a nutshell, I would say so. And I know you're in the talent space, and you know the huge opportunity there, right? And I
Mm,
think it's important to mention that, one of the things that the US has done so well is that it has, again, one could argue that it may have changed slightly, but they've really embraced immigrants and migrant workers because these are people who are building these societies, right? America is an immigrant built country. Everyone knows that as a fact, and I think in Africa, taking it back home, we've got a huge opportunity to capture the workforce of the future all within our continent, right? My co-founder, moved to the UK from South Africa, and due to some, again, political change, dependence on the wife visa had to move. Now, if you're moving with your family to another country and you can't have your kids, you're going to find the next place, right? But
Absolutely.
what remains is a skill set that you have.
Mm.
And I can guarantee you there's another country that will take you with open arms. And I think as Africans, we've got a duty to also understand our self-worth, to say, hold on, we've got a lot of skilled workers that are going to power the world one day. What happens if we could all make sure it makes itself used from a regional perspective, and the best talent from Nigeria can work in South Africa, and the best talent in the banking sector from South Africa can move to Kenya.
Yeah.
I think then we are unlocking huge opportunity, because today, when I look at my peers in the US who come from South Africa, they are absolutely thriving and they're well regarded because we actually built some super humans this side.
Mm.
So I think we sometimes undervalue the resourcefulness of our talent. But that said, it creates an opportunities for platforms like us, because to your point, they need a borderless platform that moves with them. So if you've got a passport and you want to open up a virtual bank account, we can do that for you, right? And that bank account is held by a sponsored bank in the US, but you can still use it anywhere you want to go. So that's essentially the value proposition. And I hope I captured the point in a very long-winded way, but I think those two play hand in hand. Talent and that skill set moving around the world. I think it's something that we're going to continue to see.
And there's the other side of that, isn't there? Which is, the talent doesn't need to physically, I say talent, people don't need to physically move in many occasions, right? We've got a huge gig economy across the continent that's growing exponentially. And I think, again, getting paid as a freelancer or as a gig economy worker who may want to get paid in dollars, but the customer's saying, well, they're based in South Africa, and I can only pay you in rand, or I can pay you in
All
something else,
right.
and making that seamless. And I think that's one of the big challenges. Is there's a lot of people. I know my father-in-law, he does consulting work, and he's got clients in the UK and in the US, and he's always, oh, I have to use this platform, and they sting me for this amount of money when I come and collect and or convert, and then I've got to convert it to fiat, and you go through the bank, and then you got to fill in all the the documents that you need to do, and it's a horrible experience. It really is. So I think that um, if we look at talent, there's the two aspects. There's we can physically. I think Africans typically, certainly South Africans, travel very well. I think there's that old saying: if you're in a bar somewhere, you're always going to bump into a South African, which is very true. But I
That's
also
right.
think there's that kind of that gig side as well, which is such an important part of the future of work and the way of work that we are now. In order for people to accept funds for the work that they've done, they want to get that in a seamless way as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it speaks to also how we've designed the platform. So when you look at even our team members, some of them started as freelancers in Nigeria. And, when we built out this platform, it was to say, how do you currently actually receive money? And a virtual bank account for many is how they do that, right? So they receive funds in dollars, they decide whether to off ramp it, or they settle it into a Naira bank account just to meet their monthly commitments. But many of them just keep it in their bank account
Mm.
globally. So I think the utility is there. And we just want to make it super easy for people to feel that they can earn money from anywhere in the world without being complicated by time, number one,
Yeah.
to receive your funds, and convenience. And I think on the business side, we're trying to do the same. Also offer the opportunity for businesses to open a bank account in the US, and in the very near future also incorporate in the US in a very seamless way through our concierge service. So we're really making sure that we can unlock a lot of business and opportunity for people without them even having to move.
Amazing, amazing. Jonathan, thanks so much. We're going to put a couple of links on the podcast to your kind of LinkedIn profile, and you're quite active on there, and also to Lipa World as well. If anyone wants to find out more information, best place to go is the website. Have you got anything else? I know you published some blogs on there as well. I had a read earlier, pretty interesting stuff. Anywhere else to follow you guys? TikToks, or you've not quite ventured over to the TikTok world yet?
Ironically, we're about to launch a few TikTok campaigns in the next couple of months. That was actually not my choice. The market demands. So, you'll be seeing a few influencer posts there soon.
Okay, yeah. Listen, I kind of wear the same hat as you. 4 years ago, someone said, you got to be on TikTok. I was like, that's for kids. Like,
Yeah,
obviously. Now it's
yeah.
probably our single biggest channel. But Jonathan, thanks so much. Thanks for joining us all the way over from New York. We wish you the very best of luck. Look forward to seeing what you're doing, and excited to have you on maybe next year and see what stablecoins are doing back then. And our friend in the very white building that's quite far away from you, but on the same continent, see what impact that's had. But that's one for another day.
Thanks, Darren. Appreciate your
Pleasure.
time.
All the best. Thank you.
Cheers.